Hello, it's Jude Scott and I'm going to paint with you today if you'd like to join along and do the shades and tones of a red rose. So the tones are all pretty much mid-tone. There's a lot of lighter colours. You have to exaggerate the light on a very dark red rose like the one I'm using, but you also need to have quite a lot of dark. So I'll go through how to make a tonal value swatch, and also I think probably more important for a red rose than a tonal value swatch is the temperature of the colour. So while you need very dark, you also need very warm, and then for the edges of the petals you need it a little bit lighter and a bit cooler, because there are little areas of blue reds, cool reds, and then you've got some very orange reds, which are the warm reds. The bud is actually very dark, almost to a black. So while you can add neutral tint to a red, it's probably more interesting to add the colours that you can make up yourself. I'm using Alizarin Crimson, permanent Alizarin Crimson, Cobalt 290, Aureolin Yellow and Quinacridone Gold, and these are all Holbein watercolours. I really like them because they're very finely ground, very intense colours, and you don't need to use a lot of pigment. So I always like to mix up generous puddles of my paint. So I'm going to start with the Alizarin Crimson's quite a cool colour, so I want to start with the central colour swatch being a neutral red. So a neutral red is one that's kind of right in the middle. It's not a warm red, it's not like a scarlet red, and it's not a cool red. So I just add to that a little bit of yellow just to make it a little bit more neutral than the original permanent Alizarin Crimson. So to warm up the tones for a red rose, you just need to add some yellow to the original neutral red mix, and you can see that that one is definitely, it's more towards the scarlet. Now I'm going to add some more yellow, and you'll be able to see this one in a moment. It's obscured by the rose at the moment, and that will be even warmer, and this following one is going to be warmer still, almost to an orange. And when you're doing the shades and tones of a red rose, I feel that you need to exaggerate those colours because you want it to look like a painting. Well, I want mine to look like a painting. I'm not doing botanical art, which is totally different. Then you do want it to be absolutely realistic. So you need to be able to mix tones and shades that are both warm and cool, light and dark. So this is the warmest tone or the warmest shade of the rose, and it's very pale as well. I've just cleaned off the palette there, and I'm going to make now a red that's going to get progressively cooler. So Alizarin Crimson is a coolish red to start with, so I'm now going to make it cooler still by just adding a little bit of Cobalt 290, and if you look down into the edges of those petals and the depths of the shadows, they are very dark, very dark. So if you had a tonal value swatch with your colours lined up in the tones, which is a scale of 1 to 5, that's what I usually use, these are all mid-tone. They're all about 2 and a 3, or maybe a 3. There's parts of the rose that are definitely a 4 and a 5, as dark as you can make your red. And you can use a neutral tint to make your red just darker. Neutral tint is a great colour to use because it's transparent. All my paints here are transparent. I don't use cadmium red for a rose. I find that the cadmium red will make it very dull, and it will sort of make even the most transparent paints quite dull. So I prefer to use transparent watercolours even when doing a dark red rose. And here I've just added some permanent Alizarin Crimson, and I've put a dash of Ultramarine with that just to darken it off. So if you look at all these tones and shades, you can see how it starts in the center and gets cooler as we come down the page, and much darker, and gets warmer, and I have made it a very light tone at the very top. So I hope that helps you work out how best to make some warm and cool colours in red, just from using a basic 3-colour mix: Alizarin Crimson, Aureolin Yellow and Cobalt Blue. I use a little bit of Quinacridone Gold because it really makes puts a bit of punch in, but that'll be later. I'll use more of that when I'm doing the leaves. So here we are going straight to mixing up the centre of the rose. I want it quite a warm colour. So just putting in the central edges of the petals, just a very, very warm red. The colours are quite strong because you can always dilute them with water, but if you start too light and you add water, then you'll end up with a very pale rose that might look quite insipid, which red roses certainly aren't. They're quite vibrant, very strong colours, and you need lots of pigment, and then you can add a little bit of water to drag that pigment across your paper. But at this stage, I'm using very strong pigment with not a lot of water in it, as you can see. And down where the curve of that rose is on the bottom of the paper, it's quite dark, almost a number 5 in a tonal value scale. So I've just put that colour in very dark and then drag that up to the top of the rose just with some water. Now that will fade because it's got a lot of water with it, but I want it to be cool because the depth of the rose is quite a cool red, whereas the edges of the petals are warmer and lighter. So I'm just now adding a little bit of water to that, and you can see that already just with that few strokes of paint, you've got a couple of petals. So again, I'm using a warmish tone of red and then dragging that in to make it paler with water, softening that edge. And I'm lucky enough to have roses growing in the garden, so you may have to buy a rose, or maybe you can ask a neighbour if you could borrow some of theirs, and keep referring back to your rose. It's much easier to paint from a fresh rose or an actual subject than rely on a photograph. So when you finish watching this video on your shades and tones of red, see if you can find a red rose and paint from the real object. It's so much easier. And it certainly gives you a lot better understanding, I think, of the tones and values that you need for the rose. So I'm just dropping in here some very cool colour, very cool red, a purpley red, bluish red, and that's got a lot of water added to it. And I'm doing the same on this side. I want very soft petal there. I'm using hot press paper, so the paint will scoot right across the wet surface of hot press paper. If you want it to spread quickly across the paper, add more water. If it's not going across the surface of the paper, it means that you haven't got enough water on your paper. So now I'm just dropping in some of the darkest tones for the next lot of petals, while the previous two areas of the rose dry off a little bit. I can't add more pigment to the very cool areas of the rose that I previously painted while they're still that wet. So I've put the edge colour in there, and now I'm dragging those tones back towards the original warmer colours of the rose. Some more dark in where the depth of that rose would be. And you can see that I've moved along and I've finished off putting in the warm and cool shadows, the warm and cool tones of the rose, and where the top right hand very light petal is, you can see how dark I've had to go around that to make that stand out. So those tones there are equal to the darkest tones on the original colour swatch. So now I'm starting to paint the stem of the rose, and I'm using a very dark green. I've got some indigo mixed up with this Quinacridone Gold. It makes a beautiful dark green for a rose. And it's a very warm green, even though Phthalo Blue is a very cold blue. When you mix it with Quinacridone Gold, you get this lovely rich green that's quite warm. And I'm just going to add some red to that, because these stems and petals from the rose do have quite a lot of red in them. It's almost like the intensity of the flower has stained the greens of the rose stems and the leaves. So just adding some very dark shadow in under that rose. So very, very strong tones in colour. You can make yours as cool as you like or as warm as you like for here. I'm just painting in the bottom of the bud, the base of the bud. And you can drop some colour in. I've switched to using my rigger brush, which I love for doing very fine work. And I'm just doing little turnbacks on that petal. Adding some little leaves, and again just putting a touch of the red into that. And I find if you use the same colours throughout your painting, you get a much more coordinated look for the finished subject, and it always is more coordinated and the colours all are harmonious. So I don't think you can go wrong if you've used the same reds throughout, the same yellows and the same blues. It will all be harmonious. So this is for that very, very dark red petal on the little bud. And I'm using quite a lot of water, so I can just touch my brush to that wet little leaf section that comes off the bud, and it will just sort of flow out over the paper. I just love how watercolour does that. And then I can join just by running the colours together. I can join up the petals with the leaves and the unopened section of that rosebud, and it all just flows together beautifully. So here's some more little turnbacks that have come down from that rose, and the red is flowing down into the green of this, and also from this side. This paper has stayed really wet for quite a long time. I'm using Saunders Waterford hot pressed paper, 300 gram, which is quite interesting to paint on. I'm sorry that's just a little bit out of focus there. It'll right itself in just a moment. Now you can see quite clearly how the warm and cool tones of that rose and the light and dark tones of the red have all gone together to make that rose look three-dimensional. This leaf that I'm going to paint in next is very dark, and it's got a lot of red in that green. So I'm going to paint that next. So I'm using phthalo blue, and I'm using Quinacridone Gold in Holbein to produce that really, really dark green, which with the Quinacridone Gold ends up quite a warm shade of green. You can always add more yellow to that to warm it up, and I will put some red in as well. Back to my rigger brush just to sort of add some veins to the leaf, to add the little spiky sections on the outside of the leaf. And because the central section of the leaf is still very wet, when I touch the brush to the edges of the leaf, that red will bleed in with the other colours on the paper and goes to make a really lovely mixed section of colours for the leaf. It's great fun to do. You can just add some spikes, some rose thorns to the rose. There we go, that's another leaf. So I'm just outlining this one with the colour and then adding more water to my brush and just getting that to flow across the paper. Drop in a little bit of red on the edges. And I think leaves that have light and dark, warm and cool greens in them look so much more interesting than a perfectly painted leaf with just one colour, one temperature and one tone. So mix up your temperatures of your colours. So if you've got a green, have a warm and cool green in the same leaf. And it's why the rose I think looks more interesting. I hope you do too. but I've used warm and cool reds. It's so important, and it's great fun to mix your warm and cool reds, warm and cool yellows, warm and cool blues. So if you can't think of anything to paint and you're a little bit stuck, have a go mixing various tones and shades of all colours, reds, greens, blues and yellows. You can't paint a sunflower, for example, if you can't mix up warm and cool reds. So for warm and cool reds, you add blue. To make the cool red, you add yellow to make a warm red. With your yellows, if you want a sunflower, for example, you would use a cool blue to cool down the yellow, and you can add red to warm the yellow up. So I feel that the rose here has just faded a little bit, and I'd like to add even some more dark to that. So I'm just adding another layer that's completely dry now. So if I added it while it was still wet, it would dilute down, but it's completely dry, so this is going over the top of a dry layer. And I'm just going to darken up this section here, add some veins, just to sort of restate the shape of that petal. And by putting some dark in behind that very light area of the petal, you can see how that makes it really pop out. And you definitely have the feeling of that being closer to you than being further away. So now that these other areas have dried, I'm coming down and just putting in some veins, a little bit for a little bit of interest. And if some of the lights have dried a little bit lighter, you can always add some more dark at this stage. A little bit more dark up here. It's amazing how the tones will lighten as they dry. Now there's the finished rose with all the tones that you can see. You can see how the darkest tone has been added to the colour swatch next to the lightest tone. Then it goes down the column and it gets warmer and gets cool right at the very end of those tonal value shades. Now I have wet the paper and I'm going to add a background. So sometimes you might want to leave the background unpainted, other times you might decide to put a background in. So I thought I'll throw in a background so that you can see how I would attempt it. So I've got a green, and if you're stuck for what colours to use in a background, always use opposites. Greens and blues work beautifully together, and I am repeating the colour that is already in the rose. You can see that purpley colour is in the rose, so it will all be harmonious with the background and with the rose. If you want it to flow over the paper, maybe soften out some petal edges, spray some water on. Then you can pick up the paper, or if you've got it taped to a board, pick your board up and roll it around and get it to merge on the paper. You can get some beautiful effects by doing this. I'll just get that now to roll down the paper. And I'm going to soften those edges so that the background merges to the petal and the petal merges in to the background. So again, mixing up some cool colour. This is permanent alizarin crimson and some cobalt blue. So it's very, very soft, so I don't think it's going to, at this intensity of tone, I don't think it's going to detract from the painting. And in this area here, it's going to be a wash. If I go straight over the edge of that petal, it won't matter. I've just added a little bit of Quinacridone Gold here to warm up some areas of that background. So for those of you who are quite nervous about putting in a background, don't be. If you don't like it, spray some water on, hold your paper up, run it off the page. It will dry a lot lighter because it's watercolour and the paper and the paint is quite diluted. So now I'm just going to splatter some darker green, cooler green over that for a bit of interest in the background. So you can always sit and have a think where to go to next. You don't have to rush your background. So long as you don't get any hard edges with very strong tone of paint, you're fine. You've always got plenty of room to move. I'm just curling that up because it's curled where I don't want it to go. And I'm just going to add in some more tones to that. Cobalt blue with a bit of permanent alizarin crimson. Drop in a bit more tone just to strengthen the background. So I don't really have a plan at all what I'm doing here. I'm just, I guess it's instinctive. I'm just painting what I feel. And I just feel that these colours should go in here. You can do the same with yours. Just softening there where the wash went over that petal. Now here's the finished painting. You can see I've splattered some more water on that. I've put a much warmer wash down the bottom with a grey. It's sort of like a grey mauve. And you can see all the swatch of all the tones and shades down the right hand side from very dark to light, and then from warmer to the mid-tone, the mid shade of red, and then getting cooler going to the bottom. I've got light and dark within the petals. Thank you very much for watching. Click to subscribe to see more videos, and I'll be uploading more soon. Thank you.